The driver's name was Hollis Tremblay, and he'd worked for our family for 19 years. I knew the sound of his footsteps the way you know the breathing of someone sleeping beside you. So when he came around the side of the house that Saturday morning, walking fast, not calling out, I knew something was wrong before he even reached me. I was standing on the back porch of our place in Rosedale, holding a cup of Tim Hortons I'd picked up on my way over from the condo. The sun was just coming up over the maples. It was the third Saturday in September, and my only son Marshall was getting married at 2 o'clock at St. James Cathedral. I should have been crying. I should have been calling my sister Brenda in Halifax to tell her I couldn't believe this day was here. Instead, I was just standing there with cold coffee in my hand, thinking about my husband Donald, who'd been gone 4 years that November, and how he would have worn that gray suit he loved, the one I gave the Goodwill in Etobicoke last winter because I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. Ma'am? Hollis was right in front of me. He never called me ma'am. He called me Mrs. Whitcombe in front of guests and Joanne when we were alone, which we were now. Joanne, I need you to come with me, right now. Don't take your purse, don't say anything, just walk. I looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Hollis, what are you? Please. His voice cracked on that one word. Hollis Tremblay, who drove my husband through a snowstorm in 2014 to deliver our grandson Theo to the hospital when my daughter-in-law's water broke 6 weeks early. Hollis, who never raised his voice, never showed his hand. His face was the color of newsprint. I followed him. I don't know why. Something in me went quiet and obedient, the way it had when my mother called from the doctor's office in Kingston when I was 23 and just said, "Come home." The car was running in the driveway. Not the front, the side, by the garage where the cedars blocked the view from the street. The trunk was open. "Get in," he said. "Are you out of your— Joanne, get in the trunk." His hands were shaking. I'd never seen his hands shake. Not when his wife Marlene was diagnosed 2 years ago. Not at Donald's funeral when he carried the casket. "Please, I'll explain. There's a blanket. I need you to lie down, and I need you not to make a sound. And I need you to trust me for the next 40 minutes of your life like you've trusted me for 19 years. I want to tell you," I argued. "I want to tell you," I demanded an explanation, "that I was the kind of woman who didn't get into trunks of cars on the morning of her son's wedding. But the truth is, I looked at his face and I climbed in. 64 years old, hip replacement 2 summers back, wearing the cream blouse I'd ironed at 5 in the morning, and I climbed into the trunk of my own Lincoln and let Hollis pull the lid down over me. The blanket smelled like Marlene's perfume. I remember thinking that. The blanket was hers. He must have grabbed it from his own car. I lay there in the dark and the car pulled out smooth and quiet, and I thought, if I die in here, Marshall will think I missed his wedding on purpose. And then I thought, Marshall? And my chest went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the morning air, because there was only one reason Hollis Tremblay would do this. Only one. He'd seen something, and he was protecting me from being seen back. We drove for what felt like an hour, but couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. The car slowed, the road got rough, then smooth again, then stopped. I heard the door open and shut. Footsteps. Quiet. Then the trunk lifted, and Hollis was looking down at me with that same gray face. "Stay low," he said. "We're going inside. The garage is closed. Nobody can see us. Just walk fast and don't look at the windows." I climbed out, and my hips screamed, and I didn't make a sound. I followed him through a side door into a kitchen I didn't recognize. A small bungalow. Beige cabinets, an old GE fridge with a child's drawing magneted to it, a booster seat at the table. "Where are we?" "Sit down, Joanne, please." I sat. He poured me a glass of water from the tap, and I drank it like I'd been crossing a desert. "Whose house is this?" He sat across from me. He folded his hands on the table the way men do when they're about to say something that can't be unsaid. "Joanne, the woman your son is marrying today? Vanessa Cote." "Yes, she has a husband." I stared at him. "His name is Curtis McIntyre. He lives in this house with their daughter, Poppy. She's 4. I think I laughed. I think I made a sound that was meant to be a laugh and came out like something else. Hollis, that's no, we did due diligence. Marshall's lawyer ran a check, I asked him myself. She was married before, briefly, in her 20s, divorced 8 years ago. There was no, that marriage was real. The divorce wasn't. The paperwork she showed Marshall was forged. She's been married to Curtis the whole time. They've been separated for 2 years, but she never filed. He didn't know about Marshall until last Tuesday. I couldn't feel my hands. How? I said. I've been driving her for 6 months. Since Marshall asked her to move into the Forest Hill house and she started needing rides to her appointments, her therapist, her wedding planner, her hairdresser, last Wednesday she had me drop her at an address in Mississauga. She said it was a charity board meeting. She was inside for an hour and 40 minutes. The 4th time she did it, I looked up the address. It's the office of a divorce mediator, a Mr. Lapointe. He's representing her in a dispute over child support. The child of Curtis McIntyre and Vanessa Cote McIntyre. There's a custody file open with the Ontario Court of Justice. He took a folder out from under the table. A green file folder, the kind you get at Staples. He slid it across to me. I went to see Curtis on Tuesday. I told him who I was, who I worked for, what I'd found. He cried. Joanne. He hadn't seen Vanessa in 4 months. He thought she was working in Calgary on a contract. He's been raising Poppy alone, working night shifts at a Loblaws warehouse so he can be home for her in the daytime. The girl thinks her mother is sick. That's what he tells her. Mommy's sick and she lives in a special hospital, and when she's better, she'll come home. I opened the folder. Inside was a marriage certificate from 2017, signed in Sault Ste. Marie. A birth certificate for Poppy McIntyre, March 2022, with both names on it. Photographs Vanessa in a hospital bed holding a newborn, Curtis kissing her forehead. Vanessa at a barbecue, pregnant, laughing. Vanessa and Curtis at what looked like a 3rd anniversary dinner, in a restaurant I didn't recognize, her hand on his face. Underneath the photos were bank statements. Vanessa had been moving money from the joint accounts she'd opened with Marshall over the last 8 months into a numbered account in her name. $22,000 last month, $18,000 the month before, $41,000 in August. There was also a printout of a text exchange, Vanessa to a number saved as C. Just hang on. Once we're married, the prenup is irrelevant in Ontario after a year. I just need to get through the ceremony and the year. Then I can come home and we can pay off everything. He's loaded, Kurt. His mother is loaded. We'll be fine. I closed the folder. His mother is loaded, I said out loud. Hollis didn't say anything. I thought about Marshall. My boy, 38 years old, an actuary at Sun Life, the kind of man who still called me every Sunday at 7, who'd cried at his father's funeral with his head on my shoulder for so long I'd worried about his back. Marshall, who'd been alone for years after his first engagement broke off in 2019, who'd met Vanessa at a yoga class in Liberty Village last spring and told me on the phone, "Mom, I think she's the one. She's not like the others. She's calm. She makes me feel calm." Vanessa, who'd come to my condo for Easter brunch and complimented my mother's china. Vanessa, who'd held my hand at the engagement dinner and said I never had a mother who, and I just want you to know how much it means to be welcomed. Vanessa, who'd asked me, casually, last month, if I'd considered moving the bulk of the estate into a trust before the wedding, so Marshall wouldn't be hit with the tax burden when something happens to me. Something happens to me. Curtis, I said. He knows about today. He knows. He's not going to the church. He's terrified she'll see him in Bolt. He wanted me to bring this to you. He wanted you to decide. Decide what? Whether to tell Marshall, or whether to let it play out and let the court handle the bigamy charge after. Curtis said it's your son, and you should be the one to choose how he finds out. I sat there in that kitchen with the child's drawing on the fridge. I could see now it was a crayon picture of 3 stick figures, a tall one and a small one and a third one floating in the air with the heart over her head. And I thought about every choice I'd ever made as a mother. Every time I'd let Marshall fall and learn. Every time I'd caught him. Every time I'd been wrong about which one to do. Where is she now? Getting ready at the King Edward Hotel. The ceremony is at 2. The reception is at the Albany Club at 5. And Marshall, at the Forest Hill house with his groomsmen, his best man Trevor and the 2 from Sun Life. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 9:47 in the morning. "Hollis," I said, "can you take me to my son?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. Not now." "Yes, Joanne." I asked him for a moment. He stepped outside. I sat at that kitchen table and I cried for about 90 seconds, the kind of crying you do when there's no time for crying. Then I took a paper towel from the holder and wiped my face, and I picked up the folder and I went outside. I didn't get in the trunk this time. I got in the passenger seat. Hollis didn't say anything about it. On the drive, I called my lawyer, Frances Beauchamp, who'd handled Donald's estate and who knew where every dollar of mine lived. I told her what was in the folder. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Joanne, don't confront her at the house. Don't give her a chance to disappear. Do it at the church, in front of witnesses. I'll meet you there. I'll bring 2 officers from 52 Division Aisle. Call Detective Sergeant Tomaso right now. He owes me a favor from the McKinley file. We do it clean and we do it public, so there's no question of what happened and no way she can claim coercion later." And Joanne, her voice softened, just a little. "Tell Marshall first. Don't let him find out at the altar. He'll never forgive you." I knew she was right. I'd known it the second I'd seen the marriage certificate. The instinct to spare him, to walk into that church and break it open like a piñata that was rage talking, not love. Love says you tell your son in a room with a door that closes. Love says you let him sit down first. Love says you hold his hand while he reads. We pulled up to the Forest Hill house at 10:32. The boys' cars were in the driveway. I could hear laughter from the kitchen through the open window. Someone Trevor probably was playing a record. Sinatra, "The Way You Look Tonight," Marshall's father's favorite. I went up the walk with the folder under my arm and Hollis a step behind me. I rang the bell of my own son's house. Marshall opened the door in his white shirt and his tie undone around his neck. He had shaving cream on one ear. He looked at me and his whole face went bright, the way it had been doing since he was 4 years old, and he said, "Mom, you weren't supposed to come till noon. Is everything okay?" I said, "Marshall, I need you to send the boys out for coffee." He looked at me, then at Hollis, then at the folder. He sent the boys out for coffee. We sat in the living room of that beautiful house, on the leather couch he and Vanessa had picked out together, at EQ3 in Yorkville. I put the folder on the coffee table. I told him what Hollis had told me, in the same order, in the same words. I made myself say your fiancé is married, Marshall. I made myself say she has a 4-year-old daughter named Poppy. I made myself say she has been moving money out of your joint accounts. He didn't speak. He opened the folder. He looked at every page. When he got to the photographs, he made a sound I had not heard from him since he was 11 years old and his guinea pig died. He looked up at me, and his eyes were not the eyes of a 38-year-old man. They were the eyes of the boy I had carried out of the schoolyard the day he'd been pushed off the climber and broken his collarbone. Wet and confused and waiting for me to tell him what came next. "Mom," he said. "I know, sweetheart. Mom, what do I do?" I had thought about this in the car. I had turned it over and over in my head. "You have 2 choices," I said. "You can cancel the wedding right now. We call the cathedral. We call the guests. We say there's been an emergency. You don't have to explain anything to anyone today. Or," and here I stopped, because I was about to say something I would either be very proud of or very ashamed of for the rest of my life. "You go to the church. You walk in. You let her walk down the aisle. And when the priest asks if there's any reason these 2 should not be joined, you stand up and you say yes. And the police are there. And it ends there in front of every person she has lied to. Not just you, all of them." He looked at me a long time. "Why would I do the second one?" "Because Curtis McIntyre is raising a 4-year-old who thinks her mother is in the hospital. Because Vanessa has been doing this for months and she will do it again to the next man if it isn't made absolutely impossible." Because what she did to you, Marshall, what she did was a crime, and crimes have to be witnessed for the law to act on them properly. And because, my love, I took his hand, because I do not want you carrying this in private. I do not want you alone in this house tomorrow morning explaining to people on the phone what happened. I want it known. I want it over. I want you to be able to grieve a real thing instead of a story you have to tell over and over. He was quiet for a long time. She held my hand last night, he said. She said she was nervous. She asked me if I thought my dad would have liked her. Marshall, what did he do to her? Curtis, what kind of man was he that she did this? I don't know, son. I don't know what kind of man he was. I know he's been raising her child alone for 2 years and the child thinks her mother is sick. He stood up. He walked to the window. He looked out at the maple tree his father had planted the summer they bought the house. The church, he said. I'll do it at the church, he said. I'll do it at the church. I called Frances back. She said the officers would be in plain clothes, sitting in the back row, posing as guests. They would move when Marshall stood. She said Detective Tommaso had already reached the Crown Attorney's office, and there was a warrant being drafted on the bigamy and the fraud. She said, and I will remember this until I die, Joanne. You did the right thing. Tell Marshall I said so. I told him. He nodded. He didn't cry. He got dressed for his wedding the way a man gets dressed for a funeral. Slow, careful, every button. Hollis pressed the suit jacket one more time. I made him eat a piece of toast and drink a glass of orange juice because he was the color of paper and I knew he hadn't eaten. At 1 o'clock, his groomsmen came back and he told them briefly and without breaking what was about to happen. Trevor sat down on the floor of the kitchen. The other two just stood. They asked what they could do. Marshall said, be there, just be there. When I stand up, you stand up too. I rode to the Cathedral in the Lincoln, in the front seat, holding the folder. We got there at 1:40. The guests were arriving. I went in by the side door with Hollis and Frances and Detective Tommaso and a Constable Pelletier, both in suits, looking like nothing more than middle-aged couples come to celebrate. I took my seat in the front pew. Donald's mother's pearls were on my neck. Marshall sat in the vestry with the priest, a kind man named Father Reginald, who had not been told the full situation, but who had been told be ready for anything and follow Mrs. Whitcombe's lead. At 2004, the music started. She came down the aisle on the arm of a man I had been introduced to as her uncle from Sherbrooke. He was not her uncle. I learned later he was an old family friend who had agreed to play the part because Vanessa had told everyone her father was estranged. Her father, I would also learn later, lived in Sudbury and had not been invited because Vanessa had not seen him since she was 16. And he had no idea his daughter was getting married for the second time in 8 years. She was beautiful. I will say that. The dress was ivory silk and her hair was up and she was smiling, the smile of a woman whose plan was working. She looked at Marshall at the altar and her eyes welled, perfectly, on cue. I watched her walk past me and I did not move. She reached him. He took her hand. I saw his jaw lock. I saw the small flinch in her face when she felt how cold his fingers were. She mouthed, "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. Father Reginald began. The readings. The homily, short, thank God. The exchange of intentions. If any person here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. Marshall let go of her hand. He turned to face the congregation. I do, he said. The cathedral went so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat in the back of my throat. My name is Marshall Whitcombe. The woman beside me told me her name was Vanessa Cote and that she was free to marry. I learned this morning that she is currently married to a man named Curtis McIntyre, with whom she has a 4-year-old daughter. I have the marriage certificate. I have the birth certificate. I have bank records showing she has moved over $80,000 from our joint accounts into a private account in the last 3 months. There are 2 officers from the Toronto Police Service in this church, and they have a warrant for her arrest. Vanessa's face did a thing I will never forget as long as I live. It was as though someone had pulled a string at the back of her head and her whole face slackened all at once. She turned to Marshall. She said, "Marshall, sweetheart, what are you?" And her voice was the same voice that had complimented my mother's china, and I felt sick. "Don't," he said, quietly. "Just don't." Detective Tommaso and Constable Pelletier walked up the aisle. They were calm. They were professional. They did not raise their voices. Detective Tommaso said, "Mrs. McIntyre, I'm Detective Sergeant Tommaso with 52 Division. I need you to come with us. You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay." She tried to run. She got 3 steps before she remembered the dress. Constable Pelletier caught her arm. There was a moment when the whole church was on its feet and Vanessa was sobbing and the officers were leading her down the aisle. And I saw her makeup running, and I felt nothing. I want to tell you, I felt pity or sorrow or some complicated thing, but what I felt was, my son is safe and nothing else. They took her out through the front doors. The wedding guests stood in their pews and didn't know what to do. Marshall walked over to the microphone Father Reginald had used and he said, "I'm so sorry, everyone. There won't be a wedding today. Thank you for coming. The reception is canceled." And then he walked down the aisle alone, and I stood up and walked with him, and Hollis met us at the door of the cathedral and drove us home. He came back to my condo and slept on my couch that night, with his head on a cushion I'd embroidered when I was newly married. And I sat in the armchair across from him until 2 in the morning, watching him breathe the way I had when he was an infant. The week after was the worst of my life, except for the one in November of 2020 when Donald was dying. We made phone calls. We canceled vendors. The Albany Club returned the deposit, which I had not expected, and which made me cry in a way I couldn't explain. Vanessa was charged with bigamy under Section 290 of the Criminal Code and with fraud over $5,000. She pled guilty in February to avoid a trial. She got 2 years less a day, served at the Vanier Center. She also lost custody of Poppy permanently. Curtis was granted full custody. I drove to Mississauga on a Saturday in March and met him and the little girl at a Tim Hortons on Ontario. I gave him an envelope. Inside was a check for Poppy's education fund and a letter explaining that whatever else happened in that child's life, she should know that someone she'd never met had been thinking of her on the worst day of 2 strangers' lives and had been grateful to her for being the reason the truth came out. Curtis cried. He's a good man. We send Christmas cards now. Marshall took 6 months off from Sun Life and went to see a therapist twice a week. He spent a lot of that winter at my place. He cooked. He learned to bake bread. He gained 12 pounds and lost them again. In May, he started dating, very slowly, and he is now seeing a woman named Margaret, who is a pediatric nurse at Sick Kids and who has the kindest hands I have ever seen on a human being. He is in no rush. He told me last week that he is not sure if he will ever marry. I told him that was fine. I told him I had been married to his father for 36 years, and that was enough married for both of us. Hollis Tremblay still drives for me. I gave him a raise the Monday after the wedding that wasn't, and I put him in my will. He refused both at first. I told him that was not his decision to make. He has a granddaughter now, a baby named Elise, and I knit her booties every Christmas in the colors of his wife Marlene's favorite scarf. I think about that morning often. I think about how close I came to walking into that cathedral and standing beside Marshall and watching him marry her. I think about the woman I would have become in the years after the mother-in-law, who learned things slowly, the grandmother of a child with 2 mothers, the woman holding a casserole at a hospital bedside when something happened to me. I think about Hollis with his hand shaking and his wife's blanket folded in his trunk because he hadn't had time to grab one of mine. I think about a man working the night shift at a Loblaws warehouse in Mississauga, telling his 4-year-old daughter that her mother was sick. I think about how the people who save us are almost never the ones we expect. They are not the lawyers or the priests or the men in suits. They are the quiet ones who have been watching from the driver's seat for 19 years and who know in their bones when something is wrong. If you are listening to this somewhere in your kitchen in Saskatoon, on your back porch in Antigonish, on the bus from Burnaby to New West, I want you to know one thing. A mother's instinct is real. A driver's instinct is real. A driver's instinct is real. The instincts of the quiet people in your life who love you without making a show of it are the most reliable compass you will ever own. Listen to them. Climb into the trunk if they ask you to. And if you are the quiet one, if you are the Hollis in someone else's story, be brave enough to knock on the door. The cost of being wrong is embarrassment. The cost of being silent is somebody's life. My name is Joanne Whitcombe. I am 64 years old. I live in Toronto. My son is alive and well, and so am I. And that, my friends, is more than enough for one lifetime. Thank you for listening. Take care of each other out there. I'm 64 years old, and I've learned that life keeps almost nothing hidden if you know how to listen. Vanessa hid a husband and a 4-year-old daughter behind a yoga mat and a soft voice, and for nearly a year she walked through my life smiling at my mother's china. But the truth has its own weight. It presses against the floorboards. Hollis felt it long before I did. Every time he drove her to a Mississauga address she described as a charity board meeting, he paid attention. That was all. And paying attention, in the end, is what saved my son. I think often about the chain of small decisions that led us to that kitchen with the crayon drawing on the fridge. Vanessa chose to lie. Hollis chose to look up an address. I chose to climb into a trunk on the word of a man whose hands I trusted. Marshall chose, at 38 years old in the worst hour of his life, to walk into that cathedral and let the truth be witnessed rather than swallowed. Every one of those choices had a price, and every one of them had consequences that traveled outward like ripples in still water. That is the only law I am sure of anymore. What we do comes back. Not always quickly, not always neatly, but it comes. If I could leave anything for the people listening to me now, the woman folding laundry in Moncton, the man driving the 401 home from his shift, the grandmother in Nanaimo waiting for the kettle to boil, it would be this. Build 3 things in yourself and build them every single day, because you do not know when they will be called upon. Build your conscience so that when something is wrong, you feel it in your stomach before you can explain it with your mouth. Build your mind so that when the moment comes, you can read a folder of evidence without flinching and decide what to do with steady hands. And build your spine, because being right is not enough. You have to be willing to walk up the front steps and ring the doorbell and tell your son something that will change the shape of his life. You have to be willing to sit at a kitchen table while a 4-year-old's father weeps. You have to be willing to climb into the trunk. Vanessa is at Vanier now. Curtis is raising Poppy in the same beige cabinet bungalow, and she is in junior kindergarten and she likes purple. Marshall is healing slowly, the way real healing always happens. Hollis still drives me to my dentist on Bloor every 6 months, and we don't speak of that morning, because we don't need to. Some things are understood between people who have stood together inside a hard truth. The world will give you exactly as many chances as you take. That is not a curse. That is a kindness. Take them.